Commission meeting for March 20th. That was the minutes. This is April. What is the date today?
17.
April 17. Thank you. 2012. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Of the United States.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, could we have roll call, please?
Sure. Williams?
Here.
Shannon? Here. Knudsen? Evans?
Here.
Bryson?
Here.
Kidd?
Here.
Furborn?
Is that turned on, Kate?
And then Kate has informed me that for the record, Mr. Knudsen is away for work and won't be here this evening. So,
Right.
Any revisions?
None.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add a new agenda item.
Oh,
We've skirted around the issue in a couple of meetings that I brought up about planning, trying to think of the politically correct way of saying it, planning for the 22nd century in case we are visited with a tsunami. I'd like to get that on the agenda formally. I'd like at that point in time to get the discussion going in the sense of the council or a sense of the planning commission.
how much is that something that is within our scope as a?
Well, we have like planning for natural hazards is part of what we do. So, like, if you want, if it's the pleasure of the commission, we certainly could put it on the next agenda if you want. Or did you want to have a discussion tonight?
I'd like to have a discussion and get a sense of the planning commission about the issues first and provide some insight and direction from this side of the table for the urgency, importance, or scope of the discussion that we might have in the future.
I think we want to do that next week, or we're going to do that later on in the meeting. I think this agenda changes.
Yes, and that typically is what Robert's rules, you bring up the agenda for exactly that purpose.
Yeah, you certainly something like you could discuss under new business if you want. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bring it up under some new business then. Next, commissioners, we've been distributed copies of the minutes for the last meeting. Are there any revisions or changes? Motion for approval then, please.
Moved?
Second. Aye.
Next is public comments on non-agenda items and agenda items 6, 7, and 8. And we don't have any public out there, so there'll be nothing on that. And with no public hearing scheduled for this evening. And I guess I skipped the final orders. We don't have any final orders and no old business. So next is new business, and we have two topics scheduled for tonight: a discussion on garage setback and neighborhood commercial, and then we can add an 8.3 about some tsunami preparedness.
Or what would be a more,
Sea level rise, climate change.
perhaps a more neutral term might be hazard mitigation,
Okay.
Okay.
natural hazard mitigation.
Okay. So let's start with 8.1, discussion on garage setback. Richard.
Austin.
Yeah.
Lights are right.
Okay, we brought this up as one of the items that we were going to be discussing this spring when we talk about a number of amendments to our zoning ordinance. And we've drafted an amendment and thought we would come back. Is this too hard to see,
Well,
Patrick?
the lights are in our eyes at the same time.
I know.
Anybody else have trouble?
We always have this ongoing discussion on how best to have the lights so that you can see. And
You can look on that.
Well, but it's not on the monitor.
oh, Charlie can put it on the monitor. We want to see the PowerPoint.
We're actually going to put it on this monitor.
Okay, is everybody okay? All right. So one of the amendments that we talked about is the garage setback requirement. We have had a couple variance requests concerning this particular section of the code, and so we want to take a look at it and see if we are being reasonable or if there's something we could do better. The setback requirements for all yards in residential zones are basically 7.5 feet for more than one story, or 5 feet for a one-story structure, except in front of the garage. And in front of the garage, we have a 20-foot setback. And this is for a couple different reasons. One is that it allows for a parking space or two in front of the garage doors outside. Secondly, it de-emphasizes the garage doors and favors the house front that's sitting forward. So it creates a better streetscape than having garage doors being basically what people see when they go down the street. So there's an aesthetic component. There's also a functional component as far as parking. A question that's come up is whether the 20 feet applies just to the area in front of the garage, or whether it also applies to upper stories. And this is the problem that we had most recently with a variance request, where the builder had come in with his plans, he'd read the ordinance, and he assumed that he had to have 20 foot in front of the garage doors, but he had projected the upper stories out cantilevered over the, well, one part was cantilevered, one had posts that held up a sort of a roof over the garage doors. And according to our ordinance, the way that we define a yard, which is from the ground upward, and the actual wording of this part of the ordinance, we have always assumed and understood it to mean that it was from the ground upward. So anything in front of the garage portion of the house, from the ground to the peak, would have to be set back 20 feet. So we are suggesting to you that maybe we might want to change that, and we want your feedback. In order to do that, we suggest changing that footnote to the setback requirements table to add, well, the front and side yard shall be increased to a minimum of 20 feet in front of the garage carport. The increase in setback shall not apply to portions of the dwelling that are below or to the side of the garage carport or driveway entrance. The increase in setback shall not apply to any portion of the dwelling above the garage carport that is cantilevered. So it does limit it, and it does not allow someone to support something in front of the garage setback on posts or something like that. So I'll give you some examples. The cantilever we would define as a projecting beam or member supported only at one end. These are two houses on Southwest Coast. This one has a cantilevered deck, so you can see there's no post supporting it at this end. By contrast, here's the neighbor's property, and they have a deck, but they have a post, so that would not be allowed in our ordinance. Richard had mentioned a concern that if we allow supporting posts or something like that to support a deck, before long the owner or a subsequent owner decides that they'd like to put a side on that to prevent the wind from blowing in, and before you know it, you have an enclosure. And so to protect the intent of the ordinance for the 20-foot setback, the cantilever seems to be a way to go. So the question is to you whether or not this is something that you would like to allow in our ordinance.
What is the setback? Now, probably could have looked it up, but for the rest of the house, if the garage is, how close can the front porch be to the street now?
Okay.
The way that your language is just touching on that garage setback.
That's right.
So if you have an L-shaped house,
If you have an L-shaped house, the house portion, the dwelling portion, as opposed to the garage portion, can be, if it's a one-story, could be within 5 feet of the front yard line, front lot line, or the right-of-way line. And we also have some exceptions to yards, so that if it's a deck, for instance, that's under 30 inches, it could extend, does anybody know? 18 inches or something like that beyond that. So it comes pretty close to the front lot line.
Before, it was more than 1 story, it's 7.5 feet.
okay. Isn't that pretty close?
It is,
What is
but
the reason?
it seems to be the character of the community in a lot of neighborhoods that that's how they were built. And in community design, having the houses close to the street gives the street perhaps a more intimate feel, or, makes it seem friendlier. And so there are arguments for having building fronts close to the street. But in some of our other neighborhoods, we have a setback of maybe 20, 25 feet, typically. So,
Like around the lake or different places like that where the lots are larger. So what zones or what areas are you thinking about making this change in? Is this going to be specific to certain areas, or is it a citywide setback, or what are you looking at?
well, we're thinking about if we're changing the ordinance that applies to residential zones, that would be the R15 and the R17.5.
And also that because, like in the GC zone where we allow single-family residences, or in the RM zone, the multifamily residential zone where we allow single-family residence, it refers to that R1 zone. So it would be wherever single-family houses are built, except in the RR zone, which we allow, I think, 10 feet.
Which developer asked you to look into this? Have they had a matter before us that was rejected?
The most recent variance that the Planning Commission considered was from a builder who had designed 2 houses
Right.
with these. In fact, I have.
Well, no, I was...
This is, maybe you remember this. It was very colorful in his rendition.
What I'm asking is this the individual who's brought up the potential for the change to the...
He is one of the people we've discussed it with most recently, but we also, this is an issue that arose a couple years ago, and this was also a variance situation. In this case, the variance was approved. The difference may have been that this was a deck only, and the other was actually living area in the upper stories.
So I guess where I'm going with this, the net effect of a change today, say we were to all agree that this was a good thing, would be to reverse the position that the Planning Commission took recently on a variance.
Well, no, well...
They were to reapply.
He could reapply, and in fact, when he came in with his house plans, we gave him, we made that suggestion. We said we are thinking about change to the ordinance. We're going to be talking about it in the spring, but it may be months before it's actually becomes effective if the Planning Commission and the Council decide that they want to make that change. So a lot of ifs. He didn't want to wait, and he said, I'd rather go for a variance. In the end, the variance was denied, and he came back with revised plans.
I think the one answer to your question is this isn't something that's proposed by a developer. It was something staff had been considering and bringing up as a possibility, not necessarily as a good idea or a bad idea, but just a possibility to consider. And this particular developer Deborah's talking about just happened to bring something up at a time when we were
Independent issues, then.
Pardon me?
Independent issues.
Yes.
And we've had other people who have asked about that and why it has to apply to the upper stories as well. So, it's been an ongoing issue.
I don't know. I think I see a potential for a problem. I think, would you have a limit to that cantilever section on top? I mean, somebody could, in fact, put a post out in front and put the garage door. There we go. You foresaw one of my questions. Yes.
I love it.
That would be
If
cool.
somebody can take something to an excess, they will.
That would be a cool.
Did you notice the little girl down here swinging? By the way.
I think, too, if you go back and look at that other example you put up there, I think that one there, I think that looks unsightly with that kind of cantilever effect over the house. It's not appealing. It's, it hurts my eyes in a sense. I mean, it's not what I call aesthetically pleasing. And it's, somebody else, everybody's got a different opinion on it, but to me, it's not aesthetically pleasing. You got a front door that you got a big overhang on, and
Well,
Now, this builder, he actually cantilevered part of the second story that is not in front of the garage door, so that wasn't required. This could have been built down, to the ground, and actually, except for the topography, it could have come up quite a bit closer to the street.
I understand that in that situation, but your example of somebody, I mean, if somebody can take something to an excess, they will. So I don't know what the other commissioners have a...
Well, my question is, and I hope this isn't totally ignorant, is there a requirement to have a garage?
No.
Okay. So then you could just close that off, and then you've got living space, converted living space, and they could bring the whole thing forward again, right?
Right, but they still have to have two off-street parking spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's within that 5 feet?
No.
Well, it's got to be somewhere on the lot, and it might be in the side yard or something.
But in the homes that are allowed the 5-foot setback, they still have to have the requirement for 2 off-street parking?
Right.
Yeah.
Somewhere on the property?
Right.
Okay.
Mechanically, there is a limit to what you can cantilever out without a post, so it is sort of self-correcting at some point. But there is no reason why we couldn't put a limit on the cantilever.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, when I look at that example, I say I would have to look at when is a garage not a garage anymore? If I say that's not a garage anymore...
The garage is actually in here, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so his 20-foot setback is...
If I just bolt the door so it doesn't open, this is no longer a garage?
Close off the garage door and make it so you can't get a car in or out. And
So then I can do what I want after.
Sure,
That's all.
but as long as you have the 2 off-street parking spaces.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's no requirement for garage or carport, that you have to have them.
So if if the owner here decided to convert this into living space, that's fine, and he has his 2 parking spaces anyway.
Let's take this one step further. We have a structure here that currently arguably has, 4 parking places? 2 in the garage, 2 on the street?
Probably one in the garage. And
1 in the garage, 2
and
on
2
the
in the
street.
driveway, I think.
2 in the driveway. The street we have very little right-of-way here, and so
Actually, there's a no park.
he can park one parallel to the lot line.
Yeah, where
There's
I
a no
was taking
parking
this
sign there.
is, when this becomes a VRD, and 6 people show up on a weekend,
Oh,
each with their independent cars,
we have different standards for VRDs. Right now, we require...
if it's built in a VRD zone, it's existing structure, right?
Right, but it's
It won't be renewed.
Still, to be able to be approved as a VRD, it would have to have 1 parking space for each bedroom.
Right.
1 off-street parking space for each bedroom, or we won't approve it. So
this house can make the argument because this house happens to have cars in front of the front. I've seen 2 cars parked in front of the front.
Well,
4 cars in the front.
Can we go back to the cantilevered
Yeah, but
issue,
that's-
please, the setbacks?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, assuming that's the 4 bedrooms, then yes. And if they closed it off, for instance, if they closed off the garage and converted it to another bedroom, they would not only eliminate one of their parking spaces, but end up creating a need for another one, so they probably couldn't be approved as a vacation rental under that circumstance.
If I understand this too, then around the lake, the setbacks are under different regulations?
No?
Back-
In
Right.
front of the garage.
What was the 25-foot setback you were?
Well, I just mentioned that it seems in some neighborhoods, such as the one around the lake, that the front setbacks well exceed the requirement.
And that's just built, obviously, the setback is a minimum. People are allowed to set back further. That's no problem. Some places, in some communities, actually, you have what's called a build-to line. You have to come out to a particular line. We don't have that. We have a setback line. So you have to be set back at least that far.
When I built in Clark County, nothing could be closer than 25 feet to the street. I mean, whether it was the garage or the front porch or a bedroom, you could not be any closer than 25 feet to the street.
But the issue, to echo your point about the cantilever, is whether or not, you're asking whether or not we would agree that cantilever is included in the setback, the 20-foot setback, or not.
Whether we could cantilever into that 20-foot setback, yeah.
But,
In front of a garage or carport.
and without any,
Not opposed.
without any limitation, as long as it was cantilevered.
Yeah,
Or with limitation, as long as it was cantilevered. Either way. And this can come up, I mean, we intend to bring this back in a hearing. We're just trying to get some feedback at this point, sort of workshop type situation now, so we can figure out where you're.
Aesthetically, it doesn't, from my own personal opinion, it doesn't bother me to have something cantilevered out over a garage. Further, I think I would even like to see more alternation of the facade. It was never a monolithic structure, unless it was perhaps really...
well, it does break up the
Right,
structure.
it breaks
and
up
put
the structure.
some detail to it. But
In this case, this was Sulfite variance. He had this projection with a roof and then the post, so that throws it out of our discussion as far as a cantilever. But say, for instance, he had cantilevered this roof line, but he had also cantilevered a section of the house here, and I think both of these stories were a foot to 3 to 5 feet or something like that. So he had a lot of different planes, I guess, in the house. And the garage door was actually right here on the front. So
your pointer isn't showing up. I can't.
Not very well.
yeah, let's see, here we go. Here was the garage door right there. And right in the middle of that circle. And so if we extended the 20-foot rule straight up, then that's where he ran into trouble on his upper stories. And so he was not coming out a great distance, but he thought that bringing it out a few feet was going to add interest to
I
the
thought it
house.
was more about that, the roof over the garage or the
The
awning.
shed roof. He
Yeah.
liked that idea. He thought that would appeal to his buyers.
Right. Because we'd had that discussion about posts and then closing and all that, not so much the upper.
Yeah.
Again, from a purely personal perspective, I don't have any difficulty with cantilevering out, breaking up the facade. I think there probably ought to be some common sense limit as to how far that can go. And at the same time, I do have a very strong feeling about the number of parking places that are required for a dwelling unit. And, the idea that someone could apply and build structure and then block the garage such that the only places that were left were in front of it, to me, I think flies in the face of the idea of having a garage in the first place. When I dealt with other situations. The garage parking was for the residents. Parking apron was for guests to keep them off the street, not it being the only source of parking for the structure.
Except, I don't have a garage. I park in the driveway.
Well, we're talking
So,
about, at this point...
I know what you're saying, but if he blocks off his garage so that he can't use it, and he still has 2 parking places left in front of, within the 20-foot setback, then you can't restrict it.
Many
can't-
jurisdictions do. They don't allow conversion of garages for living spaces unless there's sufficient off-street parking. So, I mean, we have got some unique issues, particularly, as you said, on these small side streets where, you can't potentially get a fire truck through on a weekend because there's so many cars parked on the streets. So, again, this is just a discussion tonight, but I think we need to be particularly careful about how much potential parking we throw out onto the streets, just from a public safety point of view.
From looking at that particular example there, if the intent of the ordinance as it stands now is twofold. You said one is to ensure that there's adequate parking, and two, that for aesthetic purposes, that the doors are not right at the front of the lot line. That does not, to me, playing devil's advocate, that does not have any impact on the spirit of the ordinance whatsoever. The doors are still set back as far as they were before, and it doesn't impede the parking at all. So I wouldn't have a problem with it from that standpoint. The next thing I would want to know is what exactly is our definition in the ordinance of a garage? Because as it stands, anything that deck is not a garage. So does that? If that was an enclosed bedroom up there, that's not a garage. So I'm not sure. And I mean, without seeing the definition of a garage, that we really are talking about that in the first place, because that's not a garage. Now, if it was, I could see it. But
where we ran into a problem was that with our definition of yard, and a yard is from the ground upward.
Unobstructed from the ground upward.
Right.
Okay.
So that's why we have to apply it to the upper stories.
The way the ordinance is written is not that there's a setback from the garage, it's that there has to be a certain amount of yard in front of it then. Is that
When we say the required yard is 20 feet, and then we look at the definition of yard, and it says unimpeded from the ground upward, then it also applies to the upper stories.
So if you change the wording and said that a setback on a garage is 20 feet.
Actually, what the ordinance says is, if you can go back to the text.
What's in black is what is currently ordinance.
What it says right now is that the setback on a one-story house is 5 feet in the front yard, 7.5 feet on a more than one-story house. And then there's a note that's dropped to this number 3 here, where it says the front and street side yard shall be increased to a minimum of 20 feet in front of a garage or carport. So instead of the 5 or 7.5 feet, you have 20 feet in front of a garage or carport.
Which, just in the way we're talking now, that's a difference than saying there's a 20-foot setback from the lot line from your lot line on a garage, because you could clearly, that would meet it. I mean, anything we show up there, you show a deck, you show an extension over a garage. If that garage is set back 20 feet, it would be in compliance with the ordinance.
Except
the way this is written is a yard, and if the yard is obstructed all the way up, that's what I'm saying. It's just the way that the wording is, basically. So I don't know.
Well, we have a couple different ways. We could change the definition of a yard, but I'm a little bit concerned about what else that might affect in our ordinance that we would be unintentional. So that's why we were trying to address it in this way.
And I don't think you should
clarifying what we mean.
Yeah, I'm not saying we should change the definition of a yard, but I'm saying maybe if that's what and again, we're just talking tonight, if that's what we wanted to do, is just take yard out of that definition and say the garage has to be set back 20 feet from the lot line. It doesn't have to.
I see what you're saying.
And therefore, we're not talking about a yard. I mean,
Right.
if it's 20 feet, it's 20 feet. So.
Except you're still going to run into the situation potentially, and I'm just
Yeah.
off the top of my head, where, okay, as long as the garage is set back 20 feet, anything above the garage can be out to 7.5 feet. So you have, 17.5 feet, or no, 12.5 feet underneath the second story.
Right.
The concern that we run into is someday that's going to be closed in. It's going to gradually close in, and you're going to be marching that out, and then, because the back of the garage is going to get filled with bikes and stuff, and you're going to slowly move the garage out, and then you get into safety issues of getting out of leaving the garage when
You're saying
you can't see.
You're saying that you're worried about him closing in the extension, but keeping it as a garage and not because I mean, once like we were just saying a minute ago, if you make an enclosure and turn it into a game room, it
That's no problem because cars aren't backing out of that.
You don't have the garage door there, and that's part of it. So.
Right, and it's still a permitted process. I mean, you'd have to permit to enclose that technically, right, to put the post and then close it. So at that point, we could address it and say, no, you can't do this. You still are. It's still a garage. We still have our setbacks. You cannot build out from that.
Unless they permanently.
Unless you shut it down and turn it into living space. And then,
Even if they do wall it off, drop it down and wall it off, then you've no longer got a 20-foot setback.
But it's not a garage. You don't need to.
it's living.
Right. If it's a living space,
And as long as you address the parking.
Right.
I was drawing pictures, and it didn't look like a very attractive house to me, but if you had a garage door somewhere in the middle of the house, so you had a wall on both sides, then you...
Sort of a U-shaped instead of an L-shaped.
And have the garage in the middle of the house and have living on the outside.
Right.
Again, the way the ordinance, I don't know. I mean, it seems like they could still comply with the ordinance that way. It's ugly. I don't know why anybody would want to do it, but,
Never stopped it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's right.
What about, except for this recent one we've had, and then you said a couple of years ago something came up.
This one was a couple years ago.
Okay, why?
It comes up
we've had
regularly.
Okay, what's wrong with just saying nothing, leaving it the way it is, and saying nothing, not even a cantilever above the garage is allowed, and then just because everybody's been able to adapt, change their house plans, and comply to the ordinance? Why do we have to change the ordinance?
We don't have to. It's just
That's
an
my
idea.
question. Why are we addressing it? What is there really a need for it? People have been able to adapt and make changes and adjust their plans, and it sounds like we're just opening a big old can of worms because there's this could happen or that could happen, and what's the ramifications of just leaving it the way it is and saying nothing above that setback?
You could do that, but I mean, like in this particular case here, is that facing the water? I mean, I can't.
Yes, that is.
Okay, maybe they're master bedrooms up there, and they said, hey, it would be great if we had a deck out here over our master bedroom. We'll walk out with some French doors and look at the ocean.
The ocean is on the other side.
Right. Okay, well, I mean,
The ocean is on the other side, and in this case, one of their reasons that they wanted to have the deck was that the other side was so windy,
Right.
and so they wanted to have their grill and so forth out on this side. So anyway, the question. Basically, the question is this an acceptable use of this space?
Right, and currently that would not be allowed, correct?
Currently, that's not allowed.
He had to get this.
He got a variance. He got a variance.
as long as that garage is 20 feet back from the road.
I tend to agree with the chair. Is this a real problem? Have we done just fine the way it is?
We just thought that it had come up enough times, and we questioned whether or not it was a necessary regulation to apply to the upper levels, and whether it really served a purpose.
And I thought it was important to bring it out so that we can have this kind of discussion.
Right, I like the idea of being able to do that.
I mean, yeah, we could take that position and everything and say leave everything the same. We wouldn't have to ever make a change in an ordinance. I mean, there's always going to be a reason to change something, but yeah, I could,
I mean, I just brought up the question.
Yeah, no.
No, this is
and
good.
It's a reasonable question.
That's what, yeah.
Why we're
I do
here.
like the diversity of it. I know I wouldn't do it all
I guess
squares and rectangles, but, it's nice.
one of the problems I have, maybe not, is that once we make a change, somebody's going to push that.
Sure.
And somebody's going to push the next one, and somebody's going to push the next one. And it's just human nature. And I've been here 6.5 years now, and I've just seen over the years different things be pushed to the limits, and so no matter what the ordinance change is, somebody's going to take it to task and say, I need a variance because it's not good enough.
Absolutely.
So
You still have the
Then we
right
say
to
no.
come back and ask us for a variance.
We say no.
You know,
Yes.
I'd great problems if there's not a problem.
I'm not with the chair.
Okay, so it looks like we have a difference of opinion here, so...
it's discussion.
Just want to make sure
Yeah.
somebody knows that.
All right, well, I think do we have adequate input to...
I think
We will bring you an ordinance, and you can deal with it
Thanks a lot.
when we do, and
I got the gavel.
resolve your differences, hopefully.
Agree with us.
I'd like to throw out, I'd like to see a limit. If we do decide to do any extensions at all, I'd like to limit it.
What do you think a reasonable limit would be?
I think I wouldn't like to see it more than, 2.5 feet maximum? I don't want it to be a whole deck. I just want it to break up the front of the house a little bit.
Oh, I see.
we already allow 18 inches for architectural features, is what it's called, and then that's been pushed to the limit and beyond, actually, on that house that we're looking at. But what we've said as a matter of interpretation, like a bay window could be allowed. And people say, okay, well, what's a bay window? I'm picturing like above my kitchen sink, I have a bay window that sticks out into this sidewalk. But they're like putting out like
The full bay.
the whole house. And
Down to the floor.
you can down to the floor, and you can sit in it. And basically, our interpretation has been it can't be really space that a person can physically occupy. But it could be, the window bow out or something like that, but not just something you have 18 inches more to stick out that you could sit in, for example.
Which I don't find anything wrong with. I mean, if we're talking about community and people being out on the street and hi neighbor, I don't have an issue with that. I think it's very nice to be able to walk by or look across the street and see my neighbors there. I don't have a problem with that. Now, yeah, there is a limit. I guess, physically, how much you can put out there, but, I think, what are you looking at, 3 feet there?
Probably 4 or 5.
That's about 6 feet.
Really?
The depth of the deck?
Yeah, the deck's
That
about
can't be a
6 feet.
6-foot panel of glass. No.
4.5.
Yeah, I'd say 4 to 5.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem obtrusive to me. It doesn't seem to be gaudy. It's not my choice, but, if we're, we can go
Might be
round and
5
round
feet.
on this, but if we're talking about, these folks bought the house, moved in, find out they can't even sit outside because of the wind on the other side, and they say, we'd like to just enjoy our home and our neighborhood. Can we have a deck?
So what does something like an awning that folds out, you can roll it out and roll it back in, how does that classify in?
Treat that as an architectural feature.
So that would, if you would have put an awning on the house,
18 inches. It could go out 18 inches into the setback.
when the last example we had, the guy that came here wanted to put a little roof over his garage, he could have actually put an awning there, and that would have been okay?
And an 18-inch awning,
Without a post.
without a post, so...
That people can put into their design to
Yes.
work?
Well, and in this case, he just made the house smaller this direction, and so he had room to do some
He was
things on
going
the
for
front.
6 bedrooms and with some pretty intent with
Yeah, it was a pretty
Yeah.
good-sized house.
Well, I agree with Michelle. If I'm probably going to see some kind of an ordinance, which I would like to see some limitations on it. And I think that maybe if it was going to be a deck, maybe 4 feet, you want to have something usable. If it's going to be living space, maybe 2 feet, would be a limit to that. And
Yeah, I like that.
I wouldn't want to see much more than that as far as overhangs into what is supposed to be a setback.
Yeah, somewhere you could have a patio set and just sit, but not picnic tables.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can draft an ordinance that will please everyone.
Good luck. Yeah.
Let me know how that works out.
Yeah,
will you?
right. I'm sure you will.
I may vote for it. I was just adding to the discussion.
You'll be among the first 7 people to know.
That's right.
Okay, on
right.
beyond garage setbacks.
Okay.
We're going to talk about neighborhood commercial now.
Moving on to something less
Yes.
controversial. So.
Okay.
Okay. This isn't, actually, I was going to say this isn't in response to a particular development. Actually, it is. We have a developer who has some property that he's interested in developing that's zoned residential. He's interested in putting some commercial uses on it. And we'd been talking about the idea in a general sense anyway about neighborhood commercial uses as a way of sort of promoting walkable neighborhoods and have a low impact limited kind of commercial use that you could have in the neighborhood that people would walk to, like the neighborhood coffee shop or the neighborhood market kind of thing. So here we are to talk about that. Just talk about it. This particular one, when I lived in Arlington, Virginia, this was my neighborhood market. It's about 2 blocks from my house. You could walk to it. And just another view of it coming up here. You can see it's just on a residential street, and so it's just a way of having something that's easy to get to. We don't have to get in the car to go to it, to get some milk or some necessities and that kind of thing.
Neighborhood commercial would be in addition to the other opportunities we have for commercial in the community, and I just wanted to put in a slide and follow it up with a little more information about what we already allow. Non-residential uses in residential zones. This is really small, and I just wanted to show the entire list, so you don't have to try to read it. But right now, in our residential zones, we allow things such as parks and schools and churches and golf courses, except for miniature golf. Temporary real estate offices only in developing neighborhoods, cemeteries, and then various utilities and that kind of thing, and bed and breakfast accommodations. So either as permitted or conditional. We do have a lot of non-residential uses in the residential zones. We also allow for home occupations. And generally, our home occupations are quite limited. Here is the list of conditions, basically. No employees other than family members. Secondary to the living purposes, it can't occupy more than 25% of the ground floor. The residential character must be maintained, no outward signs of commercial use. And nothing outside, no, and there should be no change in traffic that would be problematic for the residential neighborhood.
So the idea for home occupation is that it's still got to look like a house, and basically there should be no appearance of there being a business there.
So maybe somebody's home office.
Right.
A lot of internet, type businesses can use a home office, and it works out just fine.
Is there an issue with deliveries and the like? I mean, if you have a constant stream of UPS trucks coming and
Usually
going.
what we tell people when they come in is that, this is self-regulating for the most part. If the neighbors are happy the city's happy with the operation. But if the traffic would get to a point where it would be problematic, then we would be hearing from neighbors, and then we would have to take a look at whether or not they were actually meeting the conditions.
But UPS or something, like they're talking coming once or twice a day, you get UPS and you get FedEx or whatever, so it's not that huge a number. It's just a possibility.
Mixed use is an opportunity where commercial use and residential can combine. And we do have specifically allowed these mixed uses and encouraged them in our Nelscott area, our Taft area, and Ocean Lake. It typically allows single-family, two-family, retail sales, services, and offices. This is an example in the Ocean Lake area where it's commercial below, residential above. And in our commercial zones, the commercial zones allow single-family as a permitted use and typically, and multifamily as conditional use.
We allow mixed use in all commercial zones now.
This is strung out on beads and coffee, and this is an example where it probably was a house at one time and now it's converted to a business. It is in a commercial zone. This is outside of our community. It's in Glen Eden Beach. Again, it was a house that's now become a business. So we have some mixing up anyway. And then another possibility is commercial use in planned unit developments. With the villages of Cascade Head, the huge development north of town, originally it was going to be all residential, and then they asked if the city would consider commercial use on part of it. And with a development that size, certainly, it's over 100 acres. It's nice to have some commercial use because it does, if it's just one single use, it's a long way to the grocery store then, or, any convenience place, or meeting place. So anyway, we did allow, through an amendment to our planned unit development ordinance, commercial use, but it is restricted to really large planned unit developments, direct access to arterial street, and it also required that the development have at least 35% open space. So it was pretty specific, and probably wouldn't include any other developments right now other than villages. So, but what they're talking about is amenities for residents and visitors in the broader community, and basically limited recreation commercial uses. So,
also, I think a couple of the key things is that in the residential planned unit development, no more than 15% of the area could be commercial. And important is that the commercial uses have to be more than 100 feet away from existing off-site residential uses. So basically, there's got to be a 100-foot buffer around them.
It's not going to surprise
from neighboring developments.
Yeah. And this is an example, again, from Glen Eden Beach, which I assume, or could have been a part of a planned unit development, but it's part of the Bella Beach.
Right.
And office here up above, I'm not sure whether that's residential or commercial. There was an empty storefront here, and this is selling T-shirts and that kind of thing. I guess I understand one of these used to be a cafe.
Yeah, on the corner was a
Okay,
cafe.
this one?
Yeah.
So, uses allowed in the mixed-use PUDs, again, a long list just to show you that it offers a lot of options, but no drive-throughs, for instance, and so there are some limits, and most of them are oriented towards being a good neighbor, I guess. They are not incompatible. So the questions before you is whether or not there's a need to have neighborhood commercial,
If we could back up, the reason why one thing we mentioned the PUD thing there is because one of the options that was being suggested was that we eliminate that 100-acre minimum on PUDs that are allowed to have commercial, just eliminate it, so that any PUD could have commercial if they met certain standards. And just to also for full disclosure on that, all subdivisions of more than
2 or 10 acres.
2 acres and 10 lots.
more than 2 acres or 10 lots
There we go.
has to go through the PUD process. So,
We made that change.
so any subdivision of more than 2 acres or more than 10 lots, if you eliminate that 100-acre requirement, could conceivably have some commercial use in it, some limited commercial uses.
So, let's start out with need. We're open, to discussion here on whether or not you think more options are needed for commercial use. One approach we took is to go to the walkscore.com website, and it rates communities based and neighborhoods based on their proximity to services, retail and services. And this is a little small, I'm afraid, but Kate looked up a lot of different scores, including all the residences of the planning commissioners and counselors and city staff in our department. And I'll just read a few of these off. That basically they weight based, they assign a value to different types of uses, like grocery store is important, so they give that a 3. It's nice if everybody's close to a grocery store.
That's about how close they are.
And then different kinds of shopping and services like coffee and entertainment. So up in Rhodes End, Richard lives up in Rhodes End, and his neighborhood gets an 18, and that's pretty low on the score. The lowest we saw was on the east side of the lake, and that was 5. And so, that kind of gives you the bottom of the range. 18 in Rhodes End, around the hospital, 40, 50, probably because of proximity to those services. Let me see, I can't really tell you where these places are. We have in the Wacoma Pearl, I've asked our mapper to put the pearls in a peach color. We've got 58. There are lots of services up there. So people who live close to the shopping center up there, shopping centers, have a pretty good walkability score. Lots of things they can get without getting in the car. When we get down into the Ocean Lake area, again, it's pretty high, and the areas falling in between are close to 60. And get down in the D-Lake area, and we're up into the 70s. And, of course, there you've got, in the D-Lake area, you've got the Cultural Center, you've got the post office, the library, the city hall, the Tanger outlet, Price and Pride, the 2 small groceries, on and on. Then as you move down into Nelscott, you get back into the 50s and 60 range because you've got shops there. You've got schools. Schools are a big plus as far as being able to walk. And in the Taft area, of course, a lot more retail again. Once you get down into Cutler City, you're getting pretty low, down in 20. And plus they showed when I went to walkscore.com, they had it seemed like a coffee shop off highway in here, and we couldn't figure out what that was. But so the validity of their scores, is not the issue here, because I'm sure that there's some error involved. But I think it does sort of draw attention to the issue that some places have many options and opportunities to walk to places, and others have few.
One thing I want to point out on these 2 maps is One of the options that's you might consider is if neighborhood commercial is allowed, that it only be allowed on collectors and arterials, on streets that are classified as collectors and arterials. They're shown on these maps as red or green or blue streets. So all the gray ones are not collectors. So if you look, like the red is Highway 101 through there, that's an arterial, principal arterial. You look at High School Drive is a collector, 23rd Street, 12th, and East Devils Lake Road is a collector. Holmes Road, Logan Road, East Devils Lake Road, 22nd, Jetty along the ocean front. So that's one option to consider, is just limiting them to being allowed on those streets. So just pointing out where those are, just so when we talk about it, you're able to have that in mind. And some examples. This one is in Eugene. Another option is to consider is that they're on the corner, and this one obviously is on the corner. You can see it's house-like in a lot of ways. Also, this one and another option to think about is that they be only allowed as mixed use. In other words, somebody has to live in the same building as where the commercial use is, so it makes it sort of a big home occupation in a way. And the lower picture there shows that actually the right half of the building actually is a house in this particular case.
This is Bella Beach, and I don't.
Yeah, Bella Beach again.
Much to say about that.
This one's in Seattle. You can see in the lower picture that it's in a quite a residential area, and the upper picture is just showing that they're often used as it's a place where it becomes a gathering place, and that's one of the things that people like about them is that neighbors get to know each other better because they run into each other. If they're going over to the coffee shop, generally they might go at the same time, so they run into the same people.
If it's a nice place.
Yeah. Also, one thing, actually, a number of these, if you looked at, something else to think about is parking. There's issues of required parking or not allowed parking. None of these seem to have, like a parking lot associated with them. And depending on your views on parking, that's either a good thing or a bad thing. But in terms of keeping the residential character, one thing is parking is something to really weigh in the equation if you wanted to do that. This one's in Vancouver. Obviously, it's a house that was converted to a coffee shop, and actually a coffee shop and wine bar in this particular case. It's Vancouver, Washington. This one's in Tacoma. You can see again a converted house. The lower picture showing it on the street, how it's in a residential area. This one's in Minneapolis. The upper picture, I think, of that particular one, and that's a screen capture from Google Earth. But I think that at that point, when that picture was taken, when the Google Earth car drove by, I think that place was vacant. But you can see in the other picture where they have the tables and chairs out there, and it's a more lively situation with the plants and so on. This is another one in Eugene. It's right in the middle. There's houses on both sides of it. So we were in Eugene at the planning meeting and just sort of exploring Eugene and stumbled on this one. It just happened to be there.
So back to the discussion questions. Possible approaches would be, as Richard mentioned, decreasing or removing the minimum size limit on the PUDs that could have commercial. Another option might be to expand home occupations. so that if they actually employed people outside the family, or it was a business that would bring traffic in, that there would have to be some conditions. It could be a conditional use in a residential zone. Or if we wanted commercial uses in other areas of the community, we could rezone specific areas where we thought they were appropriate. That would be the most restrictive, I think. There may be other options, too, but those are just some that came to mind as we were putting together the slideshow.
So, going back one slide, what does staff view as the need for this? What's the driver behind this presentation?
The immediate driver is we've had someone who says they want to do commercial and residential, and that, and so we're bringing it up. Is it a reasonable idea to consider at all? Actually, I think what he has in mind is more intensive than the things we're talking about, but it's an idea that we have sort of had, I have had in the back of my mind for some time about again, promoting walkable neighborhoods, and it's a way of building community in a way where you have, again, where you run into people. You don't always have to drive to the store or whatever for things, and so you can just go there and get what you need. You can run into your neighbors and have talk and so on. Some people would also see it as an intrusion of commercial uses into a residential neighborhood, and a negative thing, where it's just increasing the commercialization of residential uses and blurring from a purely residential area to more mixes of uses, that kind of thing.
The neighborhoods have changed over the decades. We have smaller families, fewer people living in the neighborhoods. A lot of homes are occupied by one or two people. And so they're pretty quiet. And then we have a lot of people working, so they're away from their homes. During the day, neighborhoods can be pretty empty. And by mixing up a little bit, maybe it makes better use out of our infrastructure and our buildings and and adds some life to what would otherwise be kind of pretty quiet places. But again, that's one side of it. The other side of it is, do we want to do that?
I guess, speaking from a personal perspective, when I bought up on Voyage Avenue, when I bought up on Voyage Avenue, I bought into a residential neighborhood. A change like this could allow homes on either side of me. I have 6 homes around me. Potentially any one of those to be converted to a neighborhood commercial use. And I would view that as quite a negative, given the fact that my presumption was that I bought into a residential zone. Quiet was the driver. Would I have a problem in zoning currently undeveloped areas for that kind of mixed use? No. Because that then is something you buy into with your eyes wide open. As I said last time I was in Orenco Station, I knew what I was buying when I moved in there, and it was attractive. Having a New Seasons market that we could walk to, a dry cleaners, restaurants, all of that. But that was eyes wide open. So I think there's a line there that you draw between potentially wholesale conversion of neighborhoods that were never intended for this versus, let's say, an East Coast city where the neighborhood commercial and the residential were designed there to begin with. It was a 2 or 3 or 4 story brownstone with stores on the bottom. That was there to begin with. Here, I think from a purely residential point of view, not sure that it's a terribly good idea. From a planning point of view, yeah, I like the idea.
Well, I'm not saying that it's a good idea or it's a bad idea. I thought it was an idea worth bringing up and discussing, and that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. And there are potential ways to limit them. Again, we talked about the only on arterials. Well, as you see there's a lot of different ways. Only on collectors and arterials.
Maybe only the ground floor can be commercial. This is a residence in Lincoln City. Happens to be in a recreation commercial zone, but it's on a corner as opposed to being mid-block. That may be good for traffic. Might want to limit colors or appearance. This looks like a house, and it probably was a house at one time. This is down in the Taft area, again a commercial area. And so is this. It was a house that was converted. So, this one, Wine 101, it's in a commercial area. But again, looks like a house, except it's got a lot of asphalt in the front yard for parking. So that raises the question about would we want parking? Parking pushes it from the appearance of a residence to a commercial look. Here again, signage might be an issue. How much signage do we want to allow? Is this a fun thing to have in a neighborhood, or is this too commercial? This is down in Salishan. It's a different building type, but again, it's not maybe unappealing. Patrick was talking about how it's okay. It would be okay if the people buying into the neighborhood anticipated the commercial. And one approach to that would be going with a planned unit development. So if the developer wants to include some commercial in the development, presumably the developer is going to make sure that it's compatible, and then we could also help with that by limiting the kinds of uses that would go in, and the distance from existing residents and that kind of thing.
Well, just to echo back what I said earlier, as long as it was an eyes wide open for the purchasers, that's what they were getting into. I really don't have a huge philosophical objection to it. I do have a huge objection to going back and after the fact changing the ground rules. People are fighting with enough depreciation of their asset base without introducing an additional wild card that could drive down the values further.
Yeah, I agree with Patrick on that. I see certain areas of the city would be a magnet for something like that. Northwest, probably, there would be some little store, coffee shop, or donut shop, or something, and the residents there just not going along with that idea. Maybe parts of Nelscott or Taft also, other areas. Probably wouldn't be a draw. It'd be a little self-regulating because you're going to have some people around there to
in Nelscott or Taft, those areas are already zoned commercial, so there's not a real issue there. Again, and I don't want to be seeming to be an advocate. It's just something that I'm trying to bring out so you can discuss it. If it's at all a good idea, there's things you can do, like, again, one of the ones is only on arterials and collectors, have a spacing requirement where, it's not going to be on both sides of you. It's, they're going to be 1,000 feet apart or whatever number of feet might be appropriate. Can you go back to the
Periods too,
not that one, the one with all the list of things, that one. Yeah.
Main highways are being used now. You mentioned Holmes Road. West Devil's Lake Road is being buried.
It's a collector.
If you look at maybe those areas more specifically, doing something like that on Jetty, was curious to, are there any days done to see how far walk to like the convenience store? anything like that?
Typically, planners use a quarter of a mile, 20 feet. Yeah, 1,320 feet. That seems to be what works.
You know, I'm thinking the apartments that are up on Holmes Roads and the ones for the high school.
Yes.
There's a lot of people. And a lot of those people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Where they'd be walking to.
Yeah, well, you know, our town is so narrow that those people on Holmes Road are probably within a quarter mile of Highway 101, where there's some shops, not a grocery store necessarily. And also on West Devils Lake Road at the north end, we've got the marina and the RV park and a couple other lots there that are zoned for recreation commercial. So they offer the opportunity for some kind of commercial, but apparently no one has seized that opportunity or sees it as
An economic opportunity.
as an economic
Down there
opportunity.
around
Exactly.
You know, I mean, we got the hospital, and then we have a big apartment complex. Really no place for those people to walk to a convenience store.
That's true.
Pick up a gallon of milk. They're on their picnic table or something.
Exactly. That's true.
Can see a need for it. We just need to be careful where we allow them.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking of a quarter mile, good walking distance. We want to spot that up. We'd just be nuts. And up in Pat's neighborhood, it doesn't seem to be practical to have any type of convenience store on Beach Avenue.
Well, my concerns are, I got a couple. One is if we go with the convenience store, what's going to be in the convenience store? I've seen nice ones where you get some milk and you get a coffee, or you buy your coffee grounds, and I've also seen basically they're porn shops that sell bongs. You know, do we want that in a neighborhood? Can we regulate that?
There's ways to deal with that. You
Okay.
can just say, like, no bookstores, and there goes the porn shop. Setting the limits on hours, like nothing before 7 a.m. or after 10 p.m. or something, eliminates the business model of most so-called convenience stores. Limiting parking eliminates the business model of convenience stores. Design, those kinds of things can address a lot of that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good idea.
No, I think
the sort of
is.
The parade of possible bad things that can happen. A lot of that can be dealt with drafting, but again, there's also just the greater philosophical issue.
Right, and that's why I said I want to move forward with that.
It's a great idea, but not in my neighborhood.
Well, bigger roadway.
I don't know if you need bigger roadways or anything. Sidewalks ultimately would become. I think sidewalks are important now. We have a real problem with sidewalks.
I grew up in a
I
neighborhood
believe
that had a neighborhood convenience store, and it was that place where Mom and Dad would just send us, hey, we need milk today. We don't want to drive to the nearest store, and we could send the kid up for it, and it was very convenient. Having said that, when Olivia Beach was being developed, I'm thinking, wow, what a great place to put a little coffee shop, magazines, newspapers, and the like. Well, then I bought a coffee shop about 6 blocks away, and I'm thinking, you know what, I don't want that there now, because that's going to take about 10% of my weekend business away. So if we go forward with this, I would like that considered too, that says, what is going to be the impact? We may be talking just here like, oh, it's just a gallon of milk. Well, not if it's 50 gallons of milk in a weekend, or just on a Saturday, or coffees that, you know, I rely, that's a big portion of my income at my store. So those are things I would definitely want to look at. What do we put where, and what impact would it have on a local business that is already just getting a little sliver to begin with?
Right. That's a real concern.
I think Doug's point was good, too, that apartment complexes offer a lot of people in a relatively small area, so maybe can support some services that a lower density residential area would not be able to.
Well, what is our zoning now? I mean, on West Devils Lake Road, if we're going around that loop back there, I mean, we've got commercial use, we've got doctor's offices and things like that, the hospital. Is there some commercial uses on the actual road itself?
At the north end of West Devils Lake Road, near where it intersects with Highway 101, it's zoned recreation commercial. There's also some multifamily residential zoning in there, but it's immediately there, like where the RV park is, where the boat rental facility is, and so on. That's zoned recreation commercial. Around the area of the hospital is zoned professional campus.
Okay. So there's nowhere at this point then for a convenience store or something. I'm going to throw one out. I'm not saying we should have like a Circle K puts a store up there. They couldn't do that anywhere on that road right now.
Recreation commercial would accommodate that, but the professional campus does not.
Recreational commercial. Because
so
I'm wondering if it's a market-driven thing anyway. It seems like if there was a gold mine of putting a convenience store out there somewhere, someone would have come in and tried to do it already. And I don't know that there's going to be a supermarket or a little small convenience store in a neighborhood that people are going to utilize enough to actually sustain it anyway. But in any event, I kind of agree with what Pat said earlier. You don't want to rezone something that people have already moved into thinking they're getting one thing, and then you snatch the rug out and say, well, no, now you're going to have something else, because then you run into a situation where you got to regulate that. You've got how do you know if it's going to be a store or a coffee shop, or if it's going to be somebody who has a year-long garage sale thing and says it's an antique shop, or something, and you just don't know what you're going to get into there. And we showed basically my whole neighborhood up there in the Ocean Lake area, and it's mixed use, and we have some stuff over there, or at least like the coffee shop that you showed and some other things, but there's room for more of it, and it's just not there. I mean, it hasn't come in yet, and maybe it will. Maybe now that they've done the 15th Street, and it's more attractive, people kind of fill in there. But I don't know that. I mean, I think it's a neat idea if there is a need for it, but I don't know. I mean, if there's a need or not for it, especially in the Northwest area, because I think it's already available, but people just don't utilize it. I mean, I could, in theory, in my house, set up something in there. Or anywhere on that road, I believe. So I don't know. But anyway, I was just curious about what he was saying on the other side of the lake, or on West Devils Lake Road, if there was anything over there that was available for people to use without having to come on to 101. But if there is, like you said, then
right. And if we wanted to decrease the amount of traffic, say on 101 in the peak times in the summer, something like that makes perfect sense. Rather than rushing in to go to your grocery stores, they could just have that ice and pop and milk option right there. And especially if we're talking like the villages, that just makes perfect sense to have shopping up there.
Right.
Right.
And
Sun
like
River kind of thing.
Or a PUD, like you said, that's coming in now. That would be a good.
And it's not going to impact an existing business because those customers don't exist yet.
Right.
So no harm, no foul.
True.
Sounds like people are leaning towards Patrick's idea of
new areas, but not existing.
Yes.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's
some
areas that
existing.
you could look at. If you're looking like Cutler City, I think there is an option there in some way, because you got to drive up a ways to get to your grocery and such.
Well, and
there is commercial zoning there,
right?
Or along 101.
Along 101, there is.
True too.
And it's not, that area is not that deep.
Right. Right.
And there's, I mean, how far is it? I mean, I don't know walking with, but IGA is not that far on the south end of town.
Probably for most people in Cutler City, it's not walking distance, and plus there's sidewalk issues there. But
those.
There is, again, there is commercial zoning right there at 101. And
yeah, but see, that's if
Cutler
we're talking
City.
about developing a commercial property
Right.
to
It's
just
commercial.
sell milk and ice on the weekends. It's not going to happen. There's no way. But if you can incorporate it into a residential property where it's just taking up a third of the property, that's economically viable. you could survive on that. Or at least supplement some income.
Well, and we may need one or more approaches to address
Yeah.
different scenarios here, so.
Yeah, well, you mentioning along West Devils Lake Road, in particular, like in the vicinity of the hospital down to like 22nd Street or something, we talked about possibly rezoning. There's a lot of that property in that area is undeveloped now, and maybe something to think about whether it would be appropriate to have an area that's actually zoned commercial so people could see, when I buy into this area, I'm buying into an area that allows a commercial use and so on.
Well, thank you. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, it is very, very helpful.
Okay.
Limited support for the idea, if any.
Yep, supported.
Maybe just even retweaking things, don't have in there around the hospital that camp. An area where, they put in a little work at the hospital, people to come there and visit.
There's one in the hospital, isn't there?
Yes.
There's a cafeteria.
A cafeteria.
It's at the hospital.
Right. Right, I agree.
Professional camp.
Right.
It's kind of surprising that I don't see that in that area. A lot of people work in that area. Big,
And the retirement home, the complex.
Well, that sort of issue could be dealt with by amending
The PC zone, for
Yes.
example.
putting a line in and allowing that. And then, again, it's no harm, no foul, because that's a fairly intensive use to begin with.
Right. And we could also make it a conditional use in that zone so that the Planning Commission would have an opportunity to consider it and apply any additional conditions that you felt were necessary to make it compatible. So that's a good idea.
Good idea.
Okay.
All right, that's all we have.
Okay, so now we're going to go to 8.3, a little discussion on what Pat has brought up.
Well, again, it's something that I've mentioned, virtually from day one or before day one when I talked to the interview committee for the Planning Commission. I think that planning for the future is really part of the mission of the board or the Planning Commission here. And we know, and I believe, Richard, I sent you a snapshot
Right.
about what the impacts are of sea level rise, the known impacts of sea level rise over the next 7 to 10 years in Lincoln County. It's the loss of potentially of some 1,000 or 1,100 residences.
Something like that, yeah.
And you add the knowns to what our former Secretary of Defense would say, the unknown unknowns. And we know that we are living in a seismically active area. We know that we do drills for tsunami preparedness. But we as a community don't seem to try to get into the mitigation of disaster before it happens. We're planning for what do we do after it happens, but where I'm going with this is how do we begin to think and orient ourselves in our planning process toward steering people, residences, and other things away from areas that could be, for example, inundated. And so when we begin to start talking about planning, I see, beautiful maps on the wall. Should we, as a community, begin to steer commercial development above 50 or 75 feet in areas? Should we begin to think about future development being hardened, if you will, toward future natural hazards, so that that becomes a group or an area that we don't need to worry about. And we've got areas here in the city that arguably are very much at risk, whether it's a far-field event from Japan or from the Cascadia subduction zone. And what I'm asking is, does it make sense from the Planning Commission's point of view, as part of our charge, to begin to nudge the planning process along with that part of the thought process, not just the typical or the mundane planning issues? You know, and that, by the way, you know, it sounds as though I'm pulling this out of thin air, but the idea of planning mitigation is actually embedded in a lot of the FEMA documents that the federal government puts out. Because, you know, when you're planning for a community, you really ought to be thinking about, you know, if you're in a hurricane zone, not building all your things at sea level. You should zone so that people are up on pilings. Or if you are building a trailer park in Kansas, you have to put in a shelter. I mean, that's just a given. Is that something that we should begin to devote some time and effort toward? And, you know, obviously I have my bias, but I'm one member of the community. But I do think it's an important enough issue that we not just fail to notice it. It's one thing if we notice it and say, well, that we really don't need or want to do something about it, or it's not in our charge. But I'd like that to be a conscious process rather than an inadvertent.
So are you looking at future development and things that are going on in the city, or are you trying to go back and retrofit the city for, some kind of tsunami awareness or earthquake awareness? I mean, I'm trying to figure out.
We have a reasonably high level of awareness. But what I'm really going for is the future. I think it's impossible to go backward and to say, you know, that, for example, we would pick up Cutler City wholesale and move it somewhere. That's probably not a real practical activity. Mm-hmm. It might be a very practical activity to say, no, you can't put 1,000 dwelling unit apartment building in Cutler City because of that kind of a hazard. Because it makes it flies in the face of any kind of logic that you would paint a bullseye. Or let's say let's go to an extreme. An Alzheimer's care facility. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm sure you can set up some of these broad parameters about, for existing areas, what in the future you do and do not want to allow because of their increase of the hazard.
If there's a potential for.
And when you talk to the experts, it's not a potential, it's a probable.
It's a probable, yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, sooner or later it's going to happen.
Right.
It's just whether or not it's in our lifetime or our kids or grandkids, something will happen sometime. We have certain zones identified as flood zones and that type of thing already, don't we? And
we have flood zones based on the 100-year and 500-year flooding for just, from normal rain and that kind of thing. We also have a tsunami run-up zone that's identified now, and we're expecting, I guess, this fall to have...
October.
Pardon me? October. So to have improved maps, which likely will show a much larger tsunami inundation zone than we're showing now.
And I think part of my thinking on this is, as we look to expand our urban growth boundary, and as we look to expand new areas of zoning, we're not doing it just for us today, we're doing it for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And that the likelihood or the probability of those events occurring are going to become greater and greater and greater. Wouldn't it be great if 100 years down the road we were shown to be smart enough that we'd moved a significant portion of that risk out of the way?
I agree with what you're saying, Pat. I think a lot of the tsunami zones that we have here in town are already developed, and I don't think so. We can't take away what they already have, and I think, unfortunately, some of those, especially in right around the D Lake area, like your hotels and stuff that are sitting right there in that zone, I don't think we'll be able to. You're not going to be able to move those hotels. But I agree with, to whatever extent we can do it. Obviously, not putting a nursing home or something in Cutler City or anywhere else. I would agree with that too. So I guess, in short, within our power, whatever that may be, I guess the answer is yeah. If for the future we could look at that anyway, yeah, and especially when the maps come out in October, take a look at it and see what that is, and before you do new zoning, like you said, if we're going to expand our urban growth boundaries and it goes out somewhere. Another, I don't know exactly where one would be, but another tsunami zone, then, maybe look at what, allow residential, don't allow, or retirement homes and things like that. But yeah, I mean, in short, I guess I don't have a whole lot to say, I guess, but I guess.
So is there something, possibly, when those new maps come out, if something was going on in one of the particular zones where there was a risk of a potential risk of a hazard, to have a set of guidelines or something that we addressed, or a checklist, and say if this is in the zone, how what's the potential for injury or
I don't claim to have a real complete, thoroughly thought out process here, because I'm kind of hoping that collectively we can begin to talk about it, and we've got a whole bunch of smart people here in the room, and we have a whole lot of experience. The question is, can we begin to ask some of those questions and begin to get some of those answers rather than business as usual?
So, like when new stuff comes on, like you said, that we expand the urban growth boundary, and we're going to give that a new zoning designation. Is that what you're saying? Like,
well, or make specific mention of the issue as part of the planning process in the community, so that we talk about geology, we talk about landslides, we talk about floodplains, but we don't talk about a 600-pound gorilla in the room. And to my way of thinking, that should be embedded right in that process, and say, this is one of the things that we want to be considering as a community, just like we consider all of these other things.
Like wetlands and
all of that.
All
just
that stuff, yeah.
Put it out there, get it out front, get it incorporated, so that when staff or a future planning commission is looking at something, that becomes one of those criteria we'll have to begin to talk about, use as a barometer for the decisions that they're making.
We could do some analysis of what we have in the tsunami areas now, or we could wait until October and do it with the new mapping, in terms of how much of the land is currently vacant, or what kinds of zoning we have on those properties. And that might be a start where we could identify exactly what the situation is currently.
Well, I think that's an excellent way to start. We've got to start somewhere, and I don't even know where you grab a hold of this animal, honestly, to begin to move it forward. Some communities up and down the coast are dealing with the issue by hardening in place. Cannon Beach and some of the cities that are up in the more alluvial areas to the north of the head up there.
We did move the elementary school, for instance, a
the
few
school
years
district
ago.
was smart enough to close Taft
The
Elementary.
school district has done a lot of good work on that, and I think they should be applauded.
Yeah.
For
And the state has prohibited certain facilities
Right.
in some areas, so we can bring information on that, too.
But again, I think, if we would get with Dogami, we can find out what their schedule is for the release of that. We know that whatever they're going to release is not going to be less than what we've got now.
Right.
And it, in most cases, is going to expand upon the tsunami zones that we've got, just based upon what they've seen, in Japan and in Indonesia. And to me, that's the hallmark of good planning, is to try to figure out as many of these things that could go wrong and figure out our way around it.
And I don't know if it's possible, but I'm going to confess my ignorance. We say tsunami, and I don't know exactly what that means. I know the process of water rising and floods and the like, but are there grades? Are there levels? Do we say, you can't build within 100 miles? What I'm looking for is I want some education.
And that may be part of the process also, is to begin to educate ourselves.
Right. And okay, you have what we had in Japan, and I'm again going to confess my ignorance because I haven't followed up. What happened afterwards? Has it receded? Is there now viable land again there? I mean, what was eventually the impact?
What we could do is to get the preparedness people from Dogami, and I was at a conference with them, and I forget the lady who used to be here on Althea. Perhaps Althea come and do her presentation for us. I mean, I've got it on my computer, but she would do a far better job.
Right, because what I'd like to see is something that says, okay, here's how they happen.
Right.
Here's the average length or the depth and the length of time that they remain. Here's the after effect. Do we need to look at access roads? Do we need to look at raising?
We've got all of those issues, and I think if we could get Althea to come and do a presentation, and maybe it's a larger presentation.
I'd feel a lot better talking about it.
I confess that I've been to several of them, so that it's a little higher in my forebrain. But there are certainly some tsunami events are ones that we have a great deal of warning about, and we have minimal impact, relatively minimal impact. The ones that we have no warning about, that you'll feel and you'll feel for 5 or 6 minutes, you've got 10 to 15 minutes to be out of the way, and that's it. And that's the Japan model. And so there's somewhere in there that there's a happy medium for planning. I mean, we can't plan away every negative impact. I mean, it's not life. But we do know what the outcomes would be based upon these last two major events. And so I'd like to recommend that perhaps the chair entertain asking Althea to come and talk to us about this and begin to think about it.
Starting point, Richard, is that something that
If we can
is
do that.
feasible? Okay.
Can't hurt to ask.
I'm not
for sure.
familiar
I would
with her
imagine she
myself,
would
so.
come, and there's other things, other presentations we can arrange for too.
Well, I like Althea's because it's calm. There are some that are less calm
Okay.
and very much fact-based.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. I think you brought up a good point that we should be paying attention to it and planning around it, or doing the best we can probably. So, okay. So you can do that then.
Yep.
Thank you.
Do that.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. No. Thank you. Anybody else have anything? Okay.
Oh, yeah, this is the time, I'm sorry. Caught me napping. I do want to...
Just a minute. Yeah, no, I'm not. No, it's not there yet.
Gavel it down.
No,
Just
Richard's next.
I'll wait my turn.
Hang on. Richard, Community Development Director, do you have anything else?
The only thing I want to mention is I've given you each a copy of this book, City Comforts. It's full of a lot of different ideas about community building and so on. And I'm not saying any particular one of them is good or bad or anything. It's just a lot of interesting ideas to get your mind thinking. So
Okay. And Joan is
I really
not...
like the book. I think
Pardon
it's
me?
great.
Yes.
A lot of interesting ideas.
Okay. Joan is not here. Now, Planning Commissioners, do you have any?
Well, I have a concern, and it was, I'm just going to say, in the rumor mill of multiple permits being drawn for food carts in the city for a single location. And I have a concern about the proliferation of food carts coming from Portland, where I had 2 restaurants near parking lots that were developed with food carts. And my concerns about the density of them, the construction of them, the accoutrements, the amenities that surround them. I want to make sure that there seems to be this romanticization of food trucks versus food carts. Food trucks and carts are 2 different things, and I want to make sure that if we talk about carts, we realize the impact they have on a neighborhood and the local businesses that compete with them.
Well, I haven't heard anything, but maybe Richard, are there some permits?
There is an individual who's inquired about getting, I think, up to 10 food cart permits, in particular interested in the area at the end of 51st Street in Taft. He has not applied for anything. He's just asking about possibilities. I know he's interested in being able to have electricity, and I think the shelter, I think, has some electrical outlets, but there's whole issues around that. The ordinance allows food carts, not food trucks. Food carts being limited to 4 feet by 8 feet in dimension. In the past, we've had interest in them, and sometimes people put one in or 1 or 2 in, and then you never see them again.
Right.
Whether this particular person has more staying power, I don't know. But right now, the ordinance allows food carts, again, up to 4 by 8 feet in size. You can't have, a cart and then, the truck there that you're shuttling stuff from.
Right, but we don't have anything that says how many you can have on a lot.
Right.
If I have a 50 by 100 lot, I mean, can I, squeeze them all in there?
If you own a 50 by 100 foot lot, for instance, or then as long as you comply with the building code and the zoning ordinance, you can put what you want on them. We do have a requirement that, with the exception of things like food carts, you have to be operate out of a
right.
enclosed
Well, my concern is if
building.
I open up 10, let's just be crazy, I'm opening up 10 retail establishments on a single lot, drawing the cars, the traffic, the waste disposal, and all those issues that come with it. And that is a concern of mine. I've seen it in Portland over and over. And it's a blight and it's an eyesore, and I don't think it helps anybody except that person who comes and goes from that cart. Start it, fail, disappear, but that impact of those 10 is taking from the established stick and mortars. And that's just something I want to see. I don't have an objection to it in particular, but these villages of food carts I do have an issue with.
Well, what do we do then, too, with, like, the American Legion, puts out their little trailer property, hot dogs out of it's bigger than 4 by 8. I would assume, but don't they have?
But at the Eagles Lodge?
Eagles Lodge, right?
That's an interesting question. It's sort of accessory to the Eagles, I guess, in a way. It's not regulated as a food cart.
But it's kind of a, I mean, I always thought it was kind of a non-for-profit type.
I think all food carts are not-for-profit.
Yeah. In that scenario, I think they're just looking at raise some additional money to run their...
Right, and I think that's a great example is, I don't have an issue with them doing that, and I don't have an issue with the Eagles, and the Eagles don't get mad at me. But if you look at that cart, it's a dump. It's surrounded right now by garbage, old toys, a broken down table, in an unkept parking lot. And this is what I've seen over and over. The lack of maintenance, the lack of pride, the lack of commitment to that,
to the community
and to that property. It's a come and go. It's a low investment. You don't have a lot of skin in the game. If it fails, you're out. You turn it over to the next sucker. As opposed to someone who has to open a storefront, who has to make a major commitment to be here, to keep it open, to keep it looking nice, and participate in the community, to survive. So those are just the things that I want to kind of be wary of as we talk about these.
So in this particular case, would the Planning Commission or staff have any input into, say, 10 applications coming in at once for food carts? Or would it ever come?
It wouldn't come to the Planning Commission. Ordinarily, what would happen is someone would apply, and if it met our standards, the cart has to be inspected and be approved by the fire marshal and the building official and the health department. If that happens, then as long as it meets the standards, it would be allowed.
So 10 of them at once would go through that process,
right?
Go onto a lot, and there's nothing beyond that cursory of health, life safety.
So we would have to approach it we would have to rezone, we would have to put restrictions to density, to how many retail outlets you can have in a certain square footage.
We did have a limitation in Taft that I think there couldn't be more than 10 in Taft, and actually that was taken out very recently because we had two different sets of rules for food carts. One for most of Taft, except for the end of 51st Street, because that's Park, and then one for the rest of the city. And in order to simplify things, and we just went to the one system, which is so that the separate treatment for the Taft Village Core Zone was eliminated. So it's just that Taft is now the same as the rest of the city. And again, I want to make clear that that area at the end of 51st Street is not zoned Taft Village Core, it's zoned Park. So that restriction of 10 didn't apply there anyway, because that's zoned Park down there.
You know, for my fellow commissioners' comments about the impact of these short-term businesses on the community, you know, I know what a permanent business contributes to the community. It's jobs, it contributes tax base, it does a whole lot of positive things. I'm not sure, echo your comments, I'm not sure what these add in the short term other than for the individual operating them, because I don't know if we ever see any tax revenue, if we see anything out of that other than the permits that are bought and paid for.
Of course, we don't have sales tax, so you don't see. You don't see sales tax revenue. Personal property tax. I don't know if the city gets any of that, or not, or if it's just the county. I'm
by
not
extension,
sure.
is it by even encouraging this? Is it shooting ourselves in the foot because it's placing our stable businesses in even more jeopardy.
Richard, what takes place if I decided that I have an old, for lack of a better word, I'll call it a gypsy bicycle hot dog service? I have a 3-wheel bicycle that has a big hot dog vending cart on the front of it that I keep warm with a propane tank. I ride around, I ride up and down Jetty, down in the TAF area, and I try to sell hot dogs to people. Do I have to come to the city to ask for a permit to do that, and do I go to the planning department for that?
You'd need an occupational tax permit from the finance department, and you'd need a street vendor license from
And it
planning
would be
department,
inspected by the health
And-
department.
which gets you into that whole inspection process.
And from experience from somebody I know who has an ice cream truck, it's hard to get a permit. Very, very, very hard to get a permit to do that.
Well, I think, too, we've got restrictions on music that can be played and
Right,
things
noise.
like that. So, but to your point is because I looked into it, I thought, well, that's a nice little adjunct to my business. I'll just have someone pushing ice cream. And I think it's two different animals, again, because it's a limited impact, a limited audience. It's not, they're not coming to you, you're coming to them kind of thing. And then I'm assuming that bike's going to be put away at night in a nice warm garage, and then it can just sit there and rot in the rain. Be covered with grass. I don't know. But if it is, at least I can pick it up and throw it over someone's fence when they're not looking. I mean, I don't have to deal with a Winnebago out there.
I think that, we need, in this particular economy, everything we can to encourage stability and permanence and contribution, long-term contribution to the community, not just what's good for the individual. I mean, enough of that already. It's kind of the extension of the Walmart argument in reverse. It's the same damage, though.
Yeah. I would just like to talk about that.
Is it the sense of the commission you'd like to see some changes to the street vending?
Well, I'm
Or at least hear more about our street vending rules?
Maybe hear more about it, yeah.
And the other question is that something that is even going to come before us? Is this city council dealing with this and you? I mean, because I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking, because if it's not, I don't know that we need to.
I'm trying to.
In municipalities I've dealt with, I've never seen something like that come before a planning commission before. That's why I'm asking.
That's why I put
There's
it
a
as-
planning department decision that gets made.
I know, like the music.
Why don't we
and
still
Whether it's a
come
land,
back-
I'm trying to think whether it's a land use decision. I have to see
That's
exactly
my
where it is in
question
the
is
code.
how
Come back
many
next time
could be
with the
on.
report.
There we go. Let's do that.
Come back with a report.
Yeah.
Isn't this more fun than just drawing maps and houses?
Yeah,
At least something new, yeah.
Oh, boy, okay.
We're going to limit street vendors to the tsunami zone.
Be fast.
Yeah.
Okay, Doug.
I was curious, do we keep records, people that applied for permits and then not follow through with doing their building? Do we keep any records as to why they failed to follow through with their permit they were in?
When you say like someone's applied for a building permit and then don't build, we have a record of building permit applications, and whether they've been issued or not, we almost never would have a reason for why they didn't do it, why they didn't build.
We never follow up to see why didn't you go through with your permit process that you applied for?
No.
Sherry probably has some anecdotal information about that.
I mean, a lot of times it's just, we call them and say, your permit's ready to be issued. And that's, or we send them a letter, your permit's ready to be issued, come on in and get it, and we just never hear from them.
Or that your permit's ready to expire.
Right, yeah, you're about to expire, we've issued the permit and they haven't built anything. And you never hear from. And a lot of times, the organization doesn't exist anymore. The person's gone on someplace else. You know, it's.
But it seems like there could be some information there we could learn, you know, something. If they didn't complete the process, why didn't you complete it? And if why not, what could the city have done to help you out with that process?
Yeah,
it seems like there's some questions.
Yeah, it's worth seeing if we can get that kind of information, yeah.
I suspect in the last couple of years, a lot has had to do with foreclosure and the economy.
Right, yeah.
Well,
not that much commercial.
That a couple of scenarios where, you know, they actually had a vacation home down. They had a small area that they wanted to. They had a small house. They wanted to expand upon it. They had financing in place, and then it got down to the city said, okay, well, now we need underground utilities. Now we need a paved driveway going into the property. Now we need ductwork in the house to do this type of construction. And they said, well, my simple little remodeling project has now priced me out of the market of doing it. And I don't think that, you know, if that's the case, that somebody's being priced out because of our city requirements, I think that we need to know about it. Then we need to know, you know, maybe make this information more upfront to them before they apply for a permit, before they have financing in place. I think we need to do our research on.
We can try to get that kind of information. A lot of times we just get people, you know, I want to remodel my house. What do you think about this? They never apply for anything. They come in and ask. And, you know, the simple little remodel is not going to bring in those kinds of requirements. Those requirements come in when it's the value of the work being done exceeds 50% of the value of the existing improvements. So it's not, you know, it's not a simple little remodel that brings that in. It's going to be a substantial remodel, a major remodel. But I understand your concern. That's not to discount it, because I know there are circumstances where people say, well, you know, God, that's going to cost so much, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, well, they weren't aware of all the little underlying things that take place. Right. I mean, they're homeowners. They're trying to put financing in place before they go out and do something.
Yeah. Well, we always encourage people to come in and ask, to talk to us before you do something and find out what the rules are. Because we do get people who come in, you know, like we did with that one where you turned down the variance. They do all the design work and then come in and say, well, what are the rules?
Well, that's what I'm going, you know. Maybe we should have something in place that if somebody doesn't go through with the permitting process, that we actually have somebody that goes back and contacts them and finds out what their problems were. You know, why didn't this building permit go through? Did you have issues with the city? Was the city, you know, did we give you all the information that you needed to have? Is there something that the city could have done to make it more convenient for you to follow through with the process? Just thinking that we need to have something in place that we can follow up when we do have people that pull permits that don't go through with it.
Well, that was
just to educate ourselves.
One of my biggest complaints. We built a house and created a business, and whenever I talked to people about the process, I wasn't mad about what I was asked to do. I was mad about when I was asked to do it, because I'd close a wall or put something in, and then the inspector would come and go, no, you can't do that, or you got to change that. And I'll go, but you just said it was okay, but well, now it's not, and I've got to tear out or stop. And especially when I was opening a business, I was delayed almost 2 months just on these kind of little things. Opening the restaurant, just the simple fire issues, nobody knew what was involved. And so we had to get 3 or 4 different sources just to say, it's safe, it's fine. And so I'm agreeing, there's those little things we've got to be able to say, here's what you can expect, here's, I don't know, here's who to go to, things like that, to speed this along.
Or just having a process that you can, you know, have something to say when you're done with your project. What could have made this more efficient for me?
Yeah, an exit interview.
So
being more supportive of development, proactively supportive of development. Again, within the rules.
One thing we're doing that may be of help, and it's kind of an opportunity to announce it, is we're having a workshop for builders on Thursday morning, and we are talking about new ordinance changes that they should be aware of. And we have an hour and a half, I think, for our building inspector to talk about issues, changes in the building code. And hopefully we'll have a good exchange. That morning we have 28 people signed up to attend. And so,
They general contractors as well as subcontractors?
Right. I think we have a pretty good variety of people signed up. And maybe, do we have any designers as well?
I think so. We invited local contractors, subcontractors, designers. So
You even have the odd wife that goes.
Wait,
Did I call myself odd?
That again?
I'd like to have known about that.
And it's kind of interesting because we are able to offer continuing education credits for part of the class. But the building inspectors talk to a number of contractors who say, we just want to come and hear what you have to say and make sure we're on the same page as the city. The credits are nice, but that's not the reason we're coming. So that's good to hear. And we used to do those annually. I think it's been a couple years since we've had one. Yeah. So we're looking forward to doing that.
There for a while it was quarterly. It was great.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that may help. That won't help the individual homeowner, or business owner perhaps who has a project and would not be linked into those kinds of things. But the staff tries to be as helpful as possible, and we know that a lot of times when it's somebody who's never done a project before, for instance, and comes to the city and is overwhelmed by the amount of things that they need to consider, from maybe geologic hazards to fire code, building code issues. What I've observed from the people in the building department is both our lead person who talks to people about permits and our building inspector. They are well-liked, and they're very friendly, and they're generous with information, and Kate's great at the counter, good source of information. So we encourage people to come in and talk it over before they get too far down the road with their planning.
Right, and if I can, I want to just echo that. I had no complaints about anyone here. It was very helpful, great information. There were just those timing issues.
The surprises are always nasty, yeah.
Especially when you're paying rent constantly while you're waiting to open.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly we don't want to have situations where like the goalpost changes. We approve something. Oh, but you also need to do this.
Right.
Yeah, we want to get everything up.
It wasn't what, it was when.
Another thing we've instituted recently.
I should have got a food cart. Pulled the truck and we're done.
Another thing we've done recently in the past year is when a building permit comes in, an application, the public works people and the planning people get together. We just had one today where we look for anything initially that we can identify that may be a bigger issue, and we try to address those right away and do a completeness check on the application so that people get off on the right foot. And I think that's probably helped.
Yeah, we try to do that within just a few days of getting the applications in, so we see if there's going to be stumbling blocks, we get that addressed right up front, and try to get them all addressed right up front.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Next meeting?
Next meeting, we'll be talking about street vending.
Tsunamis.
Tsunamis. So, we don't have any hearings or anything set. We'll try to have some things like this. I mean, we've spent 2 hours discussing these issues, which I think is great. And so we'll be talking more about kinds of things we talked about tonight, as well as possibly some others.
So we'll come back and we'll talk about the professional, those type of things that we
We could, yep, if you like, yep.
We'll see how many of those things we can be prepared to discuss and
You'll
report
have
on
them-
in more depth
Have them all
in
ready
2
for-
weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? We're adjourned.